Welcome to the Deep Dive. Okay, today we are heading into some seriously important territory. You shared a TED Talk by the investigative journalist Carole Cadwalladr. And wow, it has really sparked some crucial thinking for both of us, I think.
Oh, absolutely. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, this isn't just about the latest tech trends. It's really about the fundamental relationship between technology, power, and, how our society actually functions.
Right.
So our goal today is to really get under the skin of her core arguments, kind of understand the context that drives her warnings, and ultimately figure out what this might mean for you as you navigate the digital world.
Exactly. And, Cadwallader's presentation is incredibly powerful. And what makes it so compelling, I think, is that personal narrative woven throughout.
Yeah.
Her current warnings come after she endured this really significant legal challenge related to her previous reporting.
Right. The Brexit stuff.
Yes, and that experience, it definitely adds this layer of urgency to her current perspective on what she actually calls a digital coup.
That phrase, digital coup, it certainly grabs your attention, doesn't it? And it's probably the best place for us to start. She states it quite emphatically. She says, it's a coup. We can't fight it if we can't see it, and we can't see it if we don't name it. So what's really behind this strong choice of words?
Yeah, it's stark language.
What specific evidence or trends is she observing that lead her to, well, this rather stark conclusion?
Well, it's interesting how she connects these seemingly unrelated global events. She points to a really worrying similarity in the language used by leaders, like the Russian and American presidents,
Okay.
noting they are speaking the same words and telling the same lies. And when you consider this alongside the visible weakening of established international structures, it really forms a key part of her argument. She sees these tech forces as deeply tangled up with these shifts in global politics.
And her concern isn't just focused on governments, is it? She introduces this really striking term, Broligarchy, a blend of tech bros and oligarchy. Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What exactly does she mean by this alignment of interests that runs through Silicon Valley to what is now becoming autocracy?
Right, the Broligarchy. If we look at the bigger picture, she's drawing a parallel, really, to what she calls Putin's playbook.
Okay.
The underlying idea there is that, a select group of business elites are allowed to amass huge wealth
In exchange for?
in exchange for unwavering loyalty to the ruling powers. So Cadwallader suggests that these huge global tech platforms and their leaders are kind of forming a similar alignment with these emerging autocratic tendencies we see around the world.
So it was like a bargain, almost.
Sort of, yeah. And what's particularly concerning about this Broligarchy idea is the potential for regulatory capture, where these really powerful tech companies can influence policy in ways that just further solidify their dominance and, well, erode democratic safeguards. We're seeing this play out, aren't we, in debates around data privacy, antitrust.
Yeah, constantly. That paints a pretty disturbing picture. And she consistently comes back to one central element in all this, the data.
Always the data.
It's always the data, she emphasizes repeatedly. She even calls it the crack cocaine of Silicon Valley. Why is data so critical to her argument here?
Well, she sees it as.
And what about things like, Elon Musk's access to U.S. Treasury data? How does that fit in?
Right. Well, a key point she makes is that she views data as much more than just, a valuable commodity. For her, it's the fundamental power source fueling this digital coup she's describing.
The engine.
Exactly. The ability to access and control these vast quantities of data enables, well, unprecedented levels of manipulation and influence. And Musk's alleged actions with the Treasury data, that really highlights the perceived strategic value, the importance of this kind of information.
Okay.
And she contrasts the Cambridge Analytica scandal, remember, that involved data from, 87 million Facebook users?
Yeah, it seemed huge at the time.
Right. But she argues the scale of today's data harvesting is just exponentially larger, and, crucially, it's now actively being used to feed AIs.
So it's not just sitting there.
No, not at all. This points to this potentially self-reinforcing cycle where, data fuels AI, which then enhances the capabilities for even more data collection and analysis. And this isn't just about storing more information. It's about AI algorithms learning patterns, learning biases from this data, which can then be amplified and used in ways that are really hard to trace or control.
Like biased facial recognition, for example.
Precisely. Technologies trained on biased data sets have shown they're less accurate for certain groups. That's a direct consequence.
Okay. And this leads directly to her, well, quite unsettling comparison between Google's data collection and the East German Stasi.
Yeah, that's a chilling comparison.
She points out the Stasi had detailed files on maybe 1 in 3 citizens, whereas Google, and let's be honest, numerous other companies have far more information on practically everyone.
Yeah.
She even asserts, we are already living inside the architecture of totalitarianism, even if that wasn't the original intention.
Right.
And then she drops this line, Instagram is the Stasi.
Yeah.
What's the thinking behind that specific analogy?
Well, it's significant because it really raises this important question about what is the nature of surveillance now in our digital age?
Okay.
Cadwalladr isn't necessarily saying Instagram has the same, deliberate, malevolent intent as the Stasi.
It's not a direct one-to-one.
No, rather, she's highlighting that its widespread data collection, combined with the potential for that data to be used for social control, for manipulation, it creates a similar outcome: pervasive monitoring.
So the effect is similar, even if the motive isn't identical.
Exactly. The sheer volume and the deeply personal nature of the information we just willingly share on platforms like Instagram. She contends it provides a level of insight into our lives that, frankly, the Stasi could only have dreamed of. And this can create an environment where people might consciously or unconsciously change their behavior, self-censor, just because they're aware they're constantly being observed.
Like the old spy movies, but digital and automated.
Kind of, yeah. Imagine those secret police files, but digital, constantly updated and collected not just by the government, but by countless companies tracking every click, every message. That's the scale she's talking about.
She then shifts focus slightly, but it seems linked back to this central idea of control. She mentions the saying politics is downstream from culture, often attributed to Steve Bannon. And then she argues that culture now is just what's next on your phone, and ultimately, culture is AI now. That's a big statement.
It is.
What is the first great AI apocalypse she describes in this context?
Right. So if we think about the implications here, her argument is essentially that the traditional forces shaping our culture, art, media, direct social interactions, they are increasingly mediated and heavily influenced by algorithms and AI.
The feed dictates the culture.
In a way, yes. And this first great AI apocalypse she talks about, it isn't about, sentient robots taking over the world.
Thankfully.
Not yet, anyway. No, it's about a total information collapse.
Okay, what does she mean by that? Not like the internet breaking.
No, not a technical breakdown. Instead, she's describing a potential future where the sheer volume of AI-generated content and a significant chunk of it could be misleading or intentionally manipulative, like deepfakes.
Right.
It just overwhelms our ability as individuals and as a society to effectively tell truth from falsehood. Imagine just a constant barrage of hyper-personalized deepfakes, sophisticated propaganda, making it almost impossible to agree on a shared reality.
A collapse of shared truth.
Exactly, a total information collapse.
And speaking of manipulation and silencing voices, Cadwalladr then shares her very personal story with what's known as a SLAPP lawsuit, strategic litigation against public participation.
Yes, a really harrowing part of her talk.
This particular lawsuit came from a close associate of Nigel Farage, a big figure in the Brexit movement. Can you explain how this type of lawsuit works? Even if they don't technically win the case, how is it used as a weapon against someone like her?
It's interesting, isn't it? The primary goal of this SLAPP suit often isn't really to win in court.
It's not about the legal merits.
Not primarily. It's usually designed to intimidate, to financially drain, and ultimately to silence critics by just dragging them through lengthy, incredibly expensive legal proceedings.
Just bury them in legal fees and stress.
Pretty much. And Cadwalladr emphasizes the sheer scope of the data harvesting she faced. They extracted something like 40,000 pieces of data from her personal devices.
40,000. From her phone, her computer.
Yeah, private messages, emails, even voice memos. Just incredibly invasive.
Wow.
And this process, combined with the relentless online abuse she describes, she calls it a digital witch burning, specifically targeting her as a female journalist doing her job.
That's awful.
It clearly demonstrates how these tactics can be used to target individuals, particularly those maybe seen as more vulnerable, and just effectively discourage critical reporting or dissent.
And she mentioned people helped fund her defense.
Yes, incredibly. 30,000 people contributed to her legal defense fund, which really highlights, I think, the widespread recognition of this as a serious threat to free expression and a free press.
It's a stark reminder of the real personal risks involved in trying to hold powerful people or groups accountable.
Definitely.
And this direct experience seems to have really intensified her concerns about the broader erosion of journalism itself. She talks about news organizations facing lawsuits and just settling.
Right, maybe due to corporate pressure or just the sheer cost.
Yeah, and her reaction to The Guardian's decision to make a syndication deal with OpenAI, especially after laying off journalists, was, well, vehement.
Understandably so.
She described it as the organization basically marrying its rapist and highlighted that her own work, her intellectual property, was being used to train ChatGPT without her consent or any compensation.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on these worries about copyright and just the future viability of journalism in this landscape?
Yeah, this raises a really fundamental question, doesn't it? About the value of original creation, the IP rights of creators in this age of AI.
Who owns the training data?
Exactly. Cadwalladr clearly sees using her work and her colleagues' work to train large language models like ChatGPT without proper consent or fair pay as, well, direct exploitation.
Especially when journalists are losing their jobs.
Precisely. The fact it happened alongside layoffs just adds this layer of irony and deep concern. It suggests a potential, systemic devaluation of human-created content.
And she mentioned the government potentially weakening copyright laws.
Yes, her reference to the UK government considering weakening copyright laws just adds to these fears. It hints at a possible future where creators' rights could be eroded, mainly benefiting the big tech companies. So, okay, in the face of all this digital coup, the power of data, the weaponized legal system, Cadwalladr doesn't just paint a bleak picture. She actually offers a call to action. She urges what she calls digital disobedience.
Right. She doesn't leave it at despair.
What specific kinds of actions is she advocating for? And what's the underlying message about maybe reclaiming some power here?
Well, it's interesting. She emphasizes individual agency, even with these huge challenges. The scale feels immense.
Totally overwhelming sometimes.
Yeah, but she points to a number of relatively simple yet potentially significant acts of digital disobedience.
Right.
Things like actively rejecting website cookies.
The annoying pop-ups.
Yeah, actually saying no, using pseudonyms online sometimes, adopting encrypted messaging apps like Signal for private chats.
Practical steps.
Practical steps. Her core message is powerful. Privacy is power. By taking concrete steps to guard our personal data, to consciously limit our digital footprints, she argues we can collectively start to push back against this pervasive surveillance and data harvesting.
So individual actions can add up.
That's the idea. And her own personal epiphany, this realization that the times she felt most vulnerable, most powerless, were often when her journalism was having the biggest impact, reaching the widest audience.
Huh.
That underscores the potential power that lies in acts of resistance, in speaking truth to power, even when it's really difficult.
And despite the seriousness of her warnings, the challenges she lays out, she does offer this crucial element of hope, doesn't she?
She does, yes.
She references Alexei Navalny's vision of a beautiful Russia of the future and expresses her own belief in a possible beautiful internet of the future.
Yeah.
What does she think is needed to make that happen?
Well, thinking about the broader implications, she really emphasizes the absolute need for collective action, the power of social movements.
It's not just individuals acting alone.
Right. She draws a direct parallel to her and her colleagues' strike at The Guardian. And she underscores the point that while individual acts of digital disobedience are important, they contribute, but achieving real, systemic, lasting change, that needs a united front. It needs people willing to actively fight for a different, more equitable future.
Which tracks with history, really. Major changes usually come from organized movements.
Exactly. It aligns with our historical understanding that significant shifts often come from sustained efforts by lots of people working together.
She ends her talk with a very direct, pointed message aimed squarely at the leaders of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Figures like Sam Altman, Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk.
Yeah, she doesn't hold back there.
She reframes their public image, suggesting they aren't these all-powerful tech gods, but actually careless men.
Careless men.
And that they are, in her view, effectively collaborators, complicit in fostering this climate of fear and control by aligning themselves and their platforms with autocratic regimes. She even makes a stark reference to the Russian oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky.
A cautionary tale.
What's the core of this really strong warning she's delivering directly to them?
Well, it raises this critical question about accountability, doesn't it? And the potential long-term consequences of their actions and alliances right now.
What goes around comes around, maybe?
Perhaps. Cadwallader's warning is stark. It's unambiguous. By prioritizing short-term business interests and getting close to autocratic regimes, these tech leaders aren't just undermining democratic values globally.
Which is bad enough.
Right. But they're also potentially putting themselves in a really precarious, vulnerable position long-term. The reference to Khodorkovsky's fate serves as this powerful, maybe chilling reminder about how fragile even immense wealth and power can be under authoritarian rule.
Implying their current alliances might not be the security blanket they think they are.
Exactly. It strongly suggests those alliances might not provide the long-term stability they currently expect.
So, to kind of wrap this all up for you, Carole Cadwalladr presents this really stark, pretty unsettling picture of where technology might be heading.
It's a wake-up call.
Her core argument is that this largely unchecked, often invisible collection of our personal data, the huge consolidating power in the hands of just a few tech companies, and their, well, increasingly concerning alignment with autocratic regimes, together, these pose a fundamental growing threat to essential democratic values and our basic individual freedoms.
Absolutely.
And her own very personal, very long legal battle just serves as this powerful, sobering example of the real risks and the significant personal costs for anyone who dares to challenge this status quo.
Absolutely. And when we think about the sources you've been sharing, this deep dive into Cadwallader's perspective really just underscores the critical urgency, doesn't it, of staying informed and thoughtfully, critically evaluating the tech we all use every single day.
You can't just passively accept it.
No, it forces you to think more deeply about exactly how your personal data is being collected, analyzed, used, the often subtle, unseen ways technology shapes the information you see, shapes the world around you. And the absolutely crucial importance of actively supporting those people, those organizations who are working hard to safeguard fundamental rights and freedoms in this digital age.
Because it affects everyone.
It really does. Cadwallader's own tough experience powerfully shows that even seemingly small, routine, individual choices we make about technology can actually have significant, far-reaching political and social consequences way beyond our own personal sphere.
Cadwalladr finishes her incredibly powerful talk by asking Silicon Valley leaders a very direct question. Do you know who you are and what you stand for?
A challenge.
But maybe, after digging into her arguments, the evidence she presents, maybe the more pertinent, the more crucial question for each of us listening is, what do we stand for in this rapidly changing, really complex digital landscape?
That's the question, isn't it?
And what small, maybe, but potentially significant acts of digital disobedience, or just conscious, deliberate engagement, can we each undertake to actively contribute to help build a better, more democratic, more equitable future, both online and, in the real world?
Yeah, it really gives you something to think about long after you've heard it.
Definitely a lot to keep in mind. And, to continue to think deeply about